Ladies and gentlemen, you know what time this is. This is the front lawn staple ritual time. If you're a front lawn faithful, you know the drill. For those of you who've come here for the first time, let me tell you what I do. I'll come to the center of the stage. It's hot, it's sunny. We're all low on energy, but I think we can all feed off each other. So I'll come to the center and wish you guys a big namaskar. And the only thing I expect in return is that you say the namaskar back to me with all the energy you can muster. All right, at this moment in time. I hope everybody's had their lunch. So let's try this. Namaskar. Namaskar. Perfect, thank you. Welcome to the 15th edition of the Jaipur Literature Festival, protected by Dettol, Banega Swasth India. We are at the front lawn, and we are delighted to introduce present tense, conflict and diplomacy. The roots of conflict between Russia and Ukraine lay deep in modern history and are reflected in the recent military attacks on the latter, a precarious state of diplomacy, and the suffering of millions in the throes of a global crisis. How does one speak of, around, or past conflict in this reality? A session on the changing dimensions of diplomacy, world powers, and an unprecedented but uncanny age of conflict. I will now invite the speakers one by one and cue them up on stage. His Excellency Alexander Ellis is the present British High Commissioner to India. Previously, he was Deputy National Security Advisor for the Integrated Review on Diplomacy, Development, and Defense. From 2017 to 2019, Ellis served as the Director General of the Department for Exiting Europe. He was British Ambassador to Portugal from 2007 to 2010 and Director of Strategy at the FCO from 2011 to 13, before being appointed Ambassador to Brazil. Ellis has worked on the government negotiation team on the Euro-EU budget framework, Treaty of the EU and EU enlargement, and has also worked on South Africa's transition to multi-party democracy. Ladies and gentlemen, His Excellency Alexander Ellis. We now invite on stage Mr. Bruno Maçães, a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute and the Wilfried Martens Centre for European Studies and a former politician in Portugal. He is the author of several books on international affairs, including The Dawn of Eurasia, On the Trail of the New World Order, Belt and Road, The Sinews of Chinese Power, and History Has Begun. Maçães is a regular commentator on the international media and advises some of the world's leading companies on geopolitics and technology. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Bruno Maçães. His Excellency Ugo Astuto's career in the Italian Foreign Service spans experience in the embassies in Nairobi and London, in the permanent representation in Brussels, and in the embassy in Delhi, where he served as Deputy Head of Mission. From February 2013 until July 2016, he was seconded to the European External Action Service in Brussels, first as Director for South and Southeast Asia, and then as Deputy Managing Director and Director for Asia and the Pacific. From July 2016 to September 2019, he was the Principal Director for Asia and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Rome. Astuto is the Ambassador of the European Union to India since October 2019. Ladies and gentlemen, His Excellency Ugo Astuto. Ms. Huma Abedin has spent her entire career in public service and national politics, beginning as an intern in First Lady Hillary Clinton's office in 1996. After 4 years in the White House, she worked in the US Senate as senior advisor to Senator Clinton, as traveling chief of staff for Clinton's 2008 presidential campaign, and deputy chief of staff at the US Department of State in 2009. Huma served as vice chair of Hillary for America in 2016, resulting in the first woman-elected nominee of a major political party. She currently serves as Hillary Clinton's chief of staff and is the New York Times bestselling author of Both and A Life in Many Worlds. Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Huma Abedin. Ms. Riva Ganguly Das joined the Indian Foreign Service in 1986. She has served as High Commissioner to Bangladesh and Ambassador to Romania, Albania, Moldova, and has served as Consul General in Shanghai and New York. Ganguly has also done postings in Spain and the Netherlands and has served in various capacities at headquarters dealing with Nepal, public diplomacy, passport and consular, and the UN. She was Director General of the ICCR, which is the Indian Council for Cultural Relations, and before her retirement, she was Secretary at the Ministry of External Affairs. Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Riva Ganguly Das. Indeed, a very decorated panel. I will leave you now to them. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I don't know whether I should say a very warm welcome to all of you. And you're really brave, and thank you so much for coming for this session, which is very, very important, and on a subject which about which we have been reading. We are watching it on television unfold in front of our eyes. The subject is present tense conflict and diplomacy. The international crisis that has been grabbing headlines for some time now is the Ukraine-Russia conflict. It is perhaps the most dangerous East-West conflict since the Second World War, and also since the collapse of the Soviet Union, and one which has the potential of triggering a new Cold War. The roots of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine lie very deep in modern history, and perhaps also in the history of the post-Cold War global order which was established, and also the post-Soviet collapse global order that was established. There are the historical reasons lie there. And but for the recent one can perhaps say that the conflict was aggravated since the Maidan Square protest and the ouster of the then president in 2014. Subsequently, attempts have been made to broker peace through the Minsk Accord, and but however, since February 24th, when the special military operations were announced, and there has been, there have been deaths, civilian deaths, and according to UN estimates, about 2 million refugees have been, people have been rendered homeless. They found refuge in neighboring countries. A stringent set of sanctions have been put in place on Russia, and we are, there is definitely sanctions take a lot of time to get fully implemented. These are not UN-backed sanctions, but we know that, just when the global world was recovering from 2 years of COVID, these sanctions can have a very grave impact on global economy once again. But sanctions again show, and the action which has been taken by Europe, its allies and European Union show that they are ready to take the pain. And I think it is a very fast moving situation. I'm acutely aware of the fact that we are discussing a situation which is happening as we speak. So without any further comments on my part, I would like to open the floor for all my panelists to perhaps first say a few words, then we will have a little bit of discussion, and I would like to have some questions from the audience as well. Maybe start with you, Alex, and I mean, you definitely, we would like to know a little bit about UK's, how UK is looking at the post-Ukraine European security architecture, which is definitely going to undergo a lot of change. And now that UK is not part of the European Union. And also a little bit about the refugee issue, because it's becoming a little bit of a issue, I believe, in the UK. Over to you, Alex.
Thanks very much, and hello everyone, and congratulations for staying in the shade. As set up in a Spanish bullfight, there's the Sol and the Sombra seats, and I think you're in the right seats over there. Really, excuse me for doing this, but special operations, as in the famous Tolstoy novel Special Operations and Peace, I think we're talking about here. This is an invasion by an autocracy of a democracy for kind of really absolutely no justifiable reason at all. And that's what it is. And I think we kind of had to accept, it's a big test of the imagination, because there hasn't been one of those for a while, but it's happening. And I guess the question for all of us is, what do you do about it? What do you do when an autocracy invades its neighbor and takes it over. I mean, if you want to get into the kind of tragicomedy of it, look at this statement made, I think in Mariupol, to describe the new citizens committee which will appear to replace the elected mayor. And one of the many ironies of history is that the approach by Putin to Ukraine is very, very similar to that of some of the czars and that of Stalin. It's kind of pretty much the same playbook. But there we go. So what do? I think the judgment is from UK and many others, you stop short of direct fighting. Ukraine is not a member of NATO. That was an agonizing decision. You know, others have been more involved with those very, very difficult decisions about how far and fast you go. But you do a lot short of that. Now, the UK, and I think one or two others, has been training the Ukrainian army since 2015, really since the events of 2014. And now we're supplying, with many others, anti-tank missiles and stuff like that. So you're trying to constrain the military options of Putin. And let's face it, it is not going well for Putin. Yeah, this was supposed to be over in 72 hours, and you present a fait accompli. We're now in a completely different situation. And then how far do you go? You're right to say, Riva, that the sanctions will hit our own economies quite a lot, particularly in Europe. But that is what I think you've got to do to kind of constrain and change the behavior. Ultimately, what you're trying to do is to do what the Indian permanent representative in the UN said, which is to respect territorial integrity, sovereignty, and the UN Charter. And I guess just two other points I'd make. One, those principles are of relevance, I would think, to every country in the world, because Russia is not the only country which is considering what it does in terms of territorial control. So it has echoes everywhere. Secondly, there's quite a lot of conversation, including here in India, about, well, is this just about the white people? Do they care about that now? Blah, 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 blah. I guess I would just say, one, this is the first kind of external invasion of this kind that's been for a long time in the continent of Europe. And secondly, one of the worst recorded crimes of humanity gets done in this area, and it has tremendous resonance. Cities like Lviv, the history of Lviv is the history of the awful European 20th century. I mean, about as bad as it gets. And so that's why I think it has a special resonance. So you do all the stuff we're trying to do, but in the end, you're trying to constrain Putin's options to show that this isn't going to succeed. And that is going to take a long time. And I'm afraid we're only at the start of what will be a long process, I think.
Thank you, Alex. May I request Bruno to say a few words, and especially if you could also give a little bit of the idea of the Ukrainian perspective, because we've been hearing, the voices from Ukraine certainly say that not enough is being done. And, there is this perception that they've been left out there to fend for themselves. So.
Thank you. So I was in Kiev for 2 weeks until 2 days before the war started. And let me tell you a little bit of what I saw there. Perhaps the audience thinks that what's happening there is a big confrontation between the West and Russia, geopolitical confrontation, and that countries like India and China should perhaps stay neutral, or in some cases, a little more sympathetic to Russia. That's not what I saw in Kiev. What I saw in Kiev was a people coming together in great courage and great bravery to defend themselves and to defend their country against a foreign tyrant. That's what's happening there. Enormous signs of bravery. My last days in Kiev, I was walking on the beach in the river, in the Dnieper River, and there were people playing volleyball, bare-chested, even though it was 3 degrees, not like here. But then there were groups of citizens, like all of us, university students, people that have never carried a gun, and they were organized in a semicircle around an instructor, learning for the first time how to carry a gun so they could defend their country against the invaders. I met a member of parliament that told me, in the middle of a very amusing and fun conversation, that she had already received a machine gun. She had the machine gun at home. And when the war started, and she had no doubts the war would start within a week, she would go to the barricades and defend her country. Imagine, this audience here, that you are defending not just your life, but defending your country. Imagine you were in risk not just of losing your life, but losing India. Not just of losing India, but losing India forever. This is what Ukrainians are doing. Why are they so brave? It's not because they are made of special stock. They are brave because this history goes back centuries. Sometimes I hear Ukraine is an American invention. Ukraine already existed as a nation centuries before America even existed. This is a story that goes back to the 11th century, that had a very strong flourishing during the Baroque age in the 17th century, then at the beginning of the 20th century. For 1,000 years, Ukraine has struggled to build a free and prosperous nation, something that Indians can very easily relate to. And this is the moment when everything comes to a head, where the country could disappear forever or could survive and prosper forever. For Ukrainians, it is, of course, extraordinary, the bravery they've been shown, but they're not being brave alone. They look around and they see many heroes that have fallen. Even in the past 10 years, 14,000 were killed in the war in the East since 2014. They see many examples of heroism all around them. And of course, what their heart tells them is they have to live up to that example. They cannot be the exception in a country that has fought for centuries for freedom. They cannot be the only ones that fall behind. And this is, I think, what explains that everyone, from a student to a member of parliament to the president, is fighting so hard to save the country. There is a large community of Ukrainians in Portugal. Now, can you believe that 12,000 of them have traveled in the other direction to Ukraine to fight for Ukraine? They are safe in Portugal, beautiful weather, could go to the beach, but they've gone back to the country. So I think this is one of the great stories of my lifetime, one of the great stories of our time, to see so much bravery in defense of such a noble cause.
May I request Ugo to, and especially to give us a little perspective about what European Union is doing and what are the challenges for European Union in the given circumstances.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming. Well, I would start by recalling that the European Union is a very epitome of multilateral diplomatic solution to conflicts. The EU construction is by definition inclusive and transparent, and it's based on the principle that all states, big and small, are equal before the law. This is true domestically for the European Union, and it's true for the EU projection international. And this is also what has made the EU such a success over the years. That's the reason for its enlargement, including its enlargement to the east. So no mysterious plot hatched somewhere beyond the Atlantic, but the natural aspiration of people who want to be free, who want to live in an open society, in an open democratic society. So this is also the approach we offered vis-a-vis Russia for decades. But Russia has decided to rip into shreds the very underpinnings of European security, the Helsinki Final Act, the Paris Charter, and the UN Charter. So that's why this is not a matter of the West against Russia, as my neighbor just said very eloquently. It's about President Putin's war, and it's President Putin's war against the rules-based international order, in clear violation of the UN Charter. What we see, no special operations, we see an invasion. We see an invasion of a peaceful country. Ukraine has never posed any threat to Russia, and neither has NATO. The narrative about NATO posing threats to Russia is a fake narrative. And if you want to make your own judgment on the situation, please look at the facts on the ground. Look at the tragic humanitarian situation which is unfolding. Look at the 2 million refugees looking for shelter into the neighboring EU countries. Don't look at the Russian propaganda and misinformation. It's a misinformation which is directed towards the rest of the world. So don't listen to me, but look at the facts on the ground and make your own judgment. And I think you will all come to the same conclusion, that there is an aggressor and there is a victim. And that's why it was so important for all of us to react to this aggression, to react forcefully with cohesion and determination. And that's what we have done. The European Union, together with its friends and allies, the UK, US, Canada, but also Australia, Japan, and I could list you others. We have set in motion a very important package of sanctions. We are now up to the 4th package of sanctions. These sanctions are meant to make it difficult for President Putin to continue its aggression. That's why there are financial sanctions, political sanctions meant to isolate those responsible for this aggression, and then sanctions targeted to those people who took the decision, and we want them to be accountable for this decision, for this unprovoked and unjustified aggression. It's important we collectively try to stop the aggression, because what is at stake is not just peace in Europe, it's also peace in Europe, but it's about international legality. It's about respect for international law, respect for the UN Charter. And that's why we have been looking for the support of our friends and partners around the world. We need to stop the war now. Russia needs to withdraw its forces unconditionally.
Thank you. Huma, if you could speak a little bit about, Ambassador Ugo just mentioned that NATO poses no threat to Russia. NATO is at the heart and center of this conflict and this, the war between Russia and Ukraine. And we hear President Zelensky say every day that, why is there a no-fly zone? So what is, if you could explain a little bit about the NATO position and, the hesitation on the no-fly zone? I think that would be useful for the audience.
Thank you. First of all, I'm really honored to be on a panel with this very distinguished group of gentlemen, and I feel like I'm learning from them as I hear them speak, and also nodding very robustly as they speak. When I arrived here on Friday, I told Sanjoy that for many years, and I think some of you had shared yesterday, I am of Indian heritage, and for many years it was my dream to come to this festival. I didn't think I'd be an author, but I thought I'd be able to, come and present. And then that dream came true. What I did not imagine is that it would be 2 weeks of me not being able to sleep at night and checking my phone every hour, watching what's happening in Europe. And I am, I confess, a recovering politician / diplomat. I worked in public service for the last 25 years, and now I really am an author. But in terms of seeing from the outside, as I see so many of my colleagues in the United States government currently, who I've known and worked with for many years, I do, just to echo what Alex said, that this wasn't just an invasion. It was an attack on the rule of law, on democracy, and on freedom. And to be sitting in the largest democracy in the world, as somebody who I did not grow up in a democracy, it really shakes you to your core. When you see that these are values that are being threatened. And as somebody who was involved in the United States elections in 2016 and almost all the ones before in the last 2 decades, we've certainly had our challenges with our own democracy. And in fact, Vladimir Putin, some would argue, successfully tried to affect our elections in 2016. So to try and deal with somebody whose entire focus has been about past glories. I mean, to the point Bruno made about history, we're such a young nation. It is one of the reasons I write, and I brought my son here. It is so important to understand history so we don't repeat those mistakes. So how are we now in this world where the pandemic didn't necessarily unite certain countries? It was a challenge in my own, but this invasion united, I would say, the broader Western world, certainly the United States, the UK, the EU, and NATO, and their allies. The number of, as Ugo just mentioned, packages about sanctions that have now been put in place, and maybe they'll take a little while for there to be pain. But our Vice President, Kamala Harris, was in Romania and Poland over the last few days to show that we stand with our partners and that we stand up for the freedom and democracy of Ukrainians. I think the thing that is most scary, the unknown for many of us, is that the last 2 weeks, what have we learned? We've learned that the plan that Putin had, that this intervention, this military intervention, maybe there should have been some focus groups in the United States, but when we have elections, we have focus groups. I think if he'd focus groups the people of Ukraine, he would have learned that no, they did not want to be part of Russia, that they believed in their own sovereign nation state. And maybe the next 2 weeks, we're gonna learn whether that state can survive and whether they can negotiate their way towards peace. I don't know. It seems like it's a very uncertain time. In terms of a no-fly zone, President Biden was very clear the other day when he was asked. he, at least on behalf of the United States, does not want to start World War III. And aside from the logistical challenges that a no-fly zone presents, the idea that this may escalate military action is not something at least our country is prepared to do. And I don't believe, and I say this, I don't believe NATO allies are prepared to do it either. That's not the United States speaking on its own. And in the meantime, we're watching these images. A friend of mine is a photographer for the New York Times, Lindsay Addario, the scenes that she is capturing and sending back. I think it's so important for us to continue to see what's happening in the world, because there are real, in that country rather, because there are real heroes and heroines, starting with Zelensky, in my opinion. And we need to continue to do everything we can to support them in a way that does not start World War III.
Thank you. Before I open the floor to questions, I just want to throw one question to all of you, whoever wants to take it. Do you think diplomacy has a chance, and do you think the talks which are going on have a chance of success? Bruno, would you like to take that?
I mean, the answer on the whole has to be no. I think, shocking as it may sound to my fellow diplomats here on the right and the left, the important variable in Ukraine is, can the Ukrainians on the battlefield cause sufficient pain and sufficient casualties to the Russian invading army? And that's what's going to determine the logic. Putin wants to get to the negotiation table, but he wants to get to the negotiation table not to have a fair negotiation, but to impose the harshest possible terms on Ukraine. But we'll see, because the news are not that bad. We just saw yesterday, Russia is now, in fact, asking China for armament and asking China for weapons, because it's starting to have a little difficulty providing for its own armies in Ukraine. And we may also find out that in the end, it's important if you have a big army and you have powerful armaments, but the courage of your people is also important. And the Russian invading army, it's all about one man alone in the Kremlin, can't even look to his soldiers in the face. And on the other side, you have a president that goes and have meals with the soldiers and visits them in the hospitals. And in war, that also matters.
Thank you. I can open the floor for questions. Please introduce yourself, tell your name. And is there somebody who's passing microphones around? Okay, maybe we'll take the question to the gentleman in the pink shirt. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Tushar, and I'm from a media organization called Connected to India. Now, this question is to the entire panel, and it deals with US and European reaction to the situation in Ukraine. There seems to be a sort of, given that the 21st century hasn't been short of conflicts, in fact, Syria, Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan, the ISIS conflict, just a few names that come to mind. From us in India, it seems that to the Western world, there's a special sort of incredulity and disbelief at Putin's actions. So my question is, what scares Western diplomats, the US, Europe most? What potential situation that you can think of as is the worst case scenario? Is it an escalation by Putin, or is it that given the fact that he's just asked China for arms, China will join in with Russia? Or is it indifference from nations like India, which, you know, we've seen both Ukraine and the Western world have been urging India to take a stand diplomatically? So which of these three situations is the worst case scenario for US and Europe?
What we'll do is we'll take a couple of questions, and I'll request all of you to address the issues. The gentleman in the black shirt, black t-shirt. Hello. Yeah.
Okay. What I see on the ground is that they're actually, the army is actually bombing the residential houses, or where the people are really, you know, and I don't see any conflict between the armies. But what I see is that the Russia is just unilaterally striking all the residential houses and creating these refugees. So who are these refugees actually? Now there is a feeling that this is another way of making the Muslims away from there, because when Russia actually conquered or invaded Chechnya, the same thing happened. And then when they take the Crimea, there was no reactions at all in 2016. And now everybody knew that the Russia may be taking those places like Luhansk, where the TV I can see that in Arabic. So that is a Muslim dominated place or what? Now there is a news that, Muslims are only 0.9% or 0.09%, whatever. So it is not against the Muslims either. So I don't know, it is not very clear. Now the NATO stand also is just like that. So I just want to know what is the clear picture.
Thank you. Maybe we'll take the lady first and then the gentleman in the front row. Yeah, or maybe, yeah. There's only one lady asking questions. We have only 10 minutes to answer. I think I'll take the question on the front row and then we will go around because there's hardly any time. Yeah.
Hi, my question is that when Ukraine got its independence in 1991, they had nuclear power. And 1996, they gave away, they denuclearized. How does that impact today? Like, what was the impact of denuclearization on the invasion today?
Thank you. The gentleman in front, please, can you give the mic to front row? Yeah.
This is a question for Ambassador Ugo. So this is Blaise Fernandez. I'm connected with Gateway House. Can the EU and India move away from being trading partners to more strategic partners, to more geopolitical partners? Look at what the US did by signing the US Communication Compatibility and Security Agreement that's in 2013. Is this the time? Is this the time to fast track this? That's my question.
Okay, thank you. I think we'll allow the panel to answer these because we're really running out of time now. Maybe Ugo, can we start with you?
Well, yes. This aggression has brought a very fast and determined and cohesive response from the European Union. So we are treading new ground on a number of dimensions. We have accepted for the first time to supply weapons to a third country, to Ukraine, so that Ukraine can exert its right to defend itself from aggression. We are working in order to reduce our energy dependency. So we are working at the beginning of a much more cohesive energy policy. And we are also working on the defense dimension for the European Union. Looking at the speed of the evolution of the EU position over the past few weeks, I suspect that also work on defense will progress very rapidly. And this will also allow us, obviously, in terms of our external projection with our partners like India, to be even more proactive when it comes to the security and defense cooperation. With your permission, I would also like to take the question on who are these refugees. Well, these are women and children and the elderly living in cities which have been relentlessly bombed by the Russian forces. What we see is an indiscriminate bombing of civilian areas. That's why the International Criminal Court has also been petitioned to look at possible war crimes. But what we see on the ground is a huge wave of refugees. We have now gone beyond the threshold of 2 million. And it's UN saying so, not me. And there is, as we speak, there is a major humanitarian operation ongoing in the neighboring countries and in the whole of the European Union to try to help and give shelter and support to these refugees. Again, mostly women and children, because men stay back to fight the invader.
Would you like to say something? Yeah.
Maybe I can ask the question about the Ukraine's denuclearization. There was a famous agreement, the Budapest Memorandum, signed by Russia, Ukraine, United Kingdom, and the United States, where all the signatories gave Ukraine assurances for their security in exchange of getting rid of nuclear weapons. There's a question whether the US and the UK have fully delivered on their commitments. Many people in Ukraine think they haven't, by the way, particularly the US. Because after all, we hear a lot from Washington that Washington doesn't have a defense agreement signed and defense guarantees signed with Ukraine. That's not entirely right, because there is the Budapest Memorandum. As for Russia, it's in complete violation of the Budapest Memorandum, and it's difficult to trust anything that Russia will sign in the future. Such is the level of violation here. Although, of course, you may have heard 2 or 3 days ago, the Russian foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, said that Russia is not in Ukraine, that Russian troops are not in Ukraine. This is what we have to deal with. The Russian foreign minister saying in public that Russia is not in Ukraine, is not fighting in Ukraine.
Thanks. I don't want to speculate too much about bad scenarios, but I'd say the kind of nightmare is here already, yeah? That you have the invasion and the displacement now of millions of people. You appear to have a change in tactics, which is beginning to look a bit more, as another questioner said, a bit like the first Chechen war, in which 120,000 people died. So it's looking pretty bad already. I think that this is a kind of global event. I mean, you can even see it's interesting. If you look at India's own globalization, the fact that you have 20,000 roughly Indian students in Ukraine tells you something about India's reach out into the rest of the world. As to who the refugees are and the people who are fleeing, they're us. Yeah, it's us living in Ukraine. Anyone who can and is trying to get out. But it is incredible that you have people actually going from Portugal back, and that tells you the sense of the sense that this is about Ukraine as a nation. So it's not an entirely encouraging scenario, to put it mildly, which is why I think the cohesion of the rest of the world and how it tries to prevent further escalation, ultimately to find a way through, but you have to constrain Putin on the battlefield to be able to do that, which is what different countries in different ways are doing. Bruno's right to refer to the Budapest Accords, and we can argue forever what the UK's role should be. We are doing quite a lot in many areas, but there's one very clear violator of Ukraine's territory, and that's one of the signatories of that accord, which is Russia.
Thank you. Maybe we'll take a few more questions. The young youngsters here.
Hello. Hi. Good afternoon to everyone. So my question was mainly to the force of United States of America, that we have seen there have been many unilateral sanctions imposed by United States majorly, and then a few other nations have also contributed to the sanctions that have been imposed on Russia. But as we have seen that Russia, one of the largest oil exporters of the world, and we are seeing that Ukraine is also under heavy damage, not evidently being able to export anything which it used to. So by imposing sanctions, are we actually affecting the perpetrators behind this war? For example, as you've accused Vladimir Putin of being the autocratic leader, but even after imposing such sanctions, just the people of Russia are suffering more than the leadership, because just as the High Commissioner of UK mentioned, that the autocratic leader, so if in case he's an autocratic leader, it's highly unlikely of him being removed from his seat. So how does even sanctions put an end to this conflict? Thank you.
Yeah.
Hello, my name is Sahil Gera and I'm a high school student. I wanted to ask that in the midst of these geopolitical tensions, how do you assess Turkey's use of Montreux Convention, first of all? And what will be the effect on Turkey's foreign policy regarding its relations with Russia on one hand, and its being the member of NATO on another, and further alongside the impact of Turkey's relationship with Syria, Saudi, and UAE?
The lady and then the gentleman in front, and then we'll close the questions. The lady there. Second rank.
Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. My name is Anuradha Bhattacharjee. I studied the Polish refugees in India during the Second World War. My question is to Ambassador Bruce. You just mentioned that the giving out of arms to the common people to defend Ukraine. Would you like to comment on what effect it is having, and not just in defending Ukraine, but also in holding up the ceasefires whenever they are declared? And here, the most glaring case in the point is the Sumy evacuation of Indian students, which had to be called off multiple times. I mean, in the news it says once, but we have the diplomat who would probably know better. So, and Ambassador Bhashwati Mukherjee is on record to say that it is creating chaos. And so, would you like to kindly comment on that?
The last question.
Hello, I have a very simple question. I have a very simple question. There's a country called China. It has invaded a country called Tibet. There's a fully functioning parliament in India. The president of the country is there. It's run massacre. There has been no mention of this invasion ever till now. But suddenly, this invasion is very important to the world. Why aren't economic sanctions being hit against China? Why aren't all the measures that are being posted against Russia should have first been put against a member of the United Nations permanent member of the United Security Council called China, who has invaded an independent country called Tibet?
I think we have just about 4 minutes left, so maybe we can start with you, Huma. There was this question on the US.
Well, the question as to sanctions, obviously, this is not the first time sanctions have been imposed on a country. Happened many times. We can go back and forth on the impact, what works, what doesn't work. I think we agree that it takes, in many cases, a little time for the sanctions to have impact. But a reminder that in 2011, Putin did have to deal with protests in Russia. They were quickly tamped down. At the time, my boss was Secretary of State and spoke out against it. And I think in part, the intention of the sanctions is for Russian people to speak up, to be in, only they can choose their leader. And there's only so much that we can do from the outside. I don't know that the solution is to go in and invade another country. We're seeing what's happening in Ukraine right now. I mean, I come back to how do we go forward? And it is one of the reasons why these conversations happening, these back channel conversations that France and Israel, amongst others, are having. Is there something coming out of that? What is the end game for Putin in the end? How do you get him to a place where he's willing to come to an agreement with Ukraine that does not cause an increasing humanitarian crisis, of which is massive, as we've talked about forever. I mean, 2 weeks feels like forever now. But the $100 million the United States has given in humanitarian assistance is in part to address literally this food emergency and the crisis that these refugees are going through. But that, to me, is the piece that we can argue or debate what happened in the past and what we've agreed to and what we haven't agreed to. And to the point that the gentlemen were making up here, the accords, the single basic point to those accords were that Ukraine was a sovereign nation state. It was understood. And Ukraine and Russia, weren't they the two founding members of the Soviet Union? So that very basic premise has been destroyed. And Sergei Lavrov, yes, has said that there is nothing, they have not invaded Ukraine. This idea of fake news, something that could not have existed 20 years ago, the capacity for a ruler and for leadership to essentially lie to their citizens is happening, and it's happening rather successfully. I'm sure you're watching on the news, relatives in Ukraine calling their relatives in Russia and their Russian relatives saying, what are you talking about? There's nothing, we have not invaded Ukraine. And until we address how to move forward in this world where this, in my opinion, cyber warfare is increasingly a problem, we're not going to get to a solution.
So we have 3 sets of issues left: Turkey, the arming of common people, and China. Anybody wants to take anything on that?
Well, I'll simply say a few words on sanction again. Yes, we try to target sanctions. We try to target sanctions to the political and military leadership who took the decision to aggress a peaceful neighbor. We also try to target the resources that Russia is using to finance this war. The Russian people, unfortunately, will also suffer. That's part of the tragedy. The Russian people is as much a victim as Ukrainian people. But unfortunately, that's the outcome of the decision taken by President Putin. On the evacuation, you will have heard from President Putin the indication that the Indian students were being held hostage by Ukrainians. I'm sure you've also read what the MEA has issued, a statement clearly saying that it was not so. So look at the sources, ask the Indian students who were there, ask who helped and who didn't. They found shelter in EU countries. They were supported by EU countries and by Ukraine, while the Russian forces were shelling urban centers. Thank you.
Turkey?
I write quite a bit on Turkish foreign policy, and my wife is Turkish. That's the only qualification I have to answer this question. Turkey is very interesting, though, because it has reached a certain way of dealing with Russia that is different from the European Union or the United States. Turkey moves into the same areas where Russia is operating, doesn't seek a direct clash, but tries to reduce Russia's freedom of operation. That's happened in Syria. And in fact, the city of Idlib is on the verge of destruction, but so far the Russians have kept out because Turkey has moved a number of military outposts all around Idlib. That's something I think the US and UK could have thought about it, and the EU, that we need new solutions to deal with this kind of Russian aggression that we're seeing. Quickly on sanctions, many theories about what sanctions are for. For me, they have a very clear purpose: to weaken Russia over the medium term. We don't want Russia invading Poland or the Baltic states 5 years from now. And if the sanctions prevent them from having access to sophisticated semiconductors with which they build their airplanes and their missiles, that is great news, isn't it? Of course, India has to think about whether it can rely on Russia to provide sophisticated armament now that Russia has no access to semiconductors and other critical components. This is a global crisis and not just a crisis in a corner of Europe.
So that was a very interesting session that we had. And I would like to thank the audience actually for braving the heat and sitting through this session and asking some very interesting questions, which have led to a good discussion. And thank you all for coming, and thank you, the panelists, for a wonderful discussion. A very, very distinguished panel. We couldn't have it better. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, present tense, conflict and diplomacy. And what you just saw is probably a prime example of how conflicts can be resolved through dialogue, conversation, and diplomacy. What it requires is time, something we don't have right now. Therefore, to end the engaging session, we thank His Excellency Alexander Ellis, Bruno Maçães, His Excellency Ugo Astuto, and Huma Abedin in conversation with Riva das Ganguly. May we please request them to accept a small token of our love and appreciation. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be back with our next session, Stellar Days and Starry Nights, shortly. Thank you. Please note that Ms. Huma Abedin and Mr. Bruno Maçães will be signing their books at the author book signing area behind front lawn, little cute yellow tent. So make your way there if you want to continue more conversation in a diplomatic manner. Thank you so much.